I think I had said the point of that if evolutionary from an evolutionary point, our brain is tuned to seek patterns in everything we see, so that we are able to map the visual information onto some particular meaning, which we gather from either innate knowledge or our experience knowledge. But it's, I think, even more than that, because not only that do we need to seek patterns, but it's so important for us to seek patterns that the brain tries to find ways to deal with even insufficient information. So it might have data that is not going to immediately lead to that conclusion, but if it's very close to that possible conclusion, and if it's very statistically likely that that might be the explanation for that, the info that what we are seeing, then it might consider that to be the actual meaning of it. So, like in this case, it is if these circles and triangular lines were arranged in some random way, then we might have seen them as just random lines and cut out circles. But they are arranged somehow in the particular exact way where we can imagine as if it's a white triangle on top, which is covering them. So that is very unlikely to happen just by accident. So it seems that it's more natural to assume that it is a triangle there. So it might be that statistical probability plays a role. And so, and such assumptions also, I guess, are supported in some way, because we tend to prefer false positives over false negatives. So it's fine to make a mistake, but assume that there was something, because like in the wild also, in like if we hear some sound and we assume that it's a predator, even if it's not likely, it's still better for our survival to just assume that.
Right. Yeah. Two fantastic points. Um, did somebody say that Purvi also wanted to say something about it? Amiruz? Purvi, do you want to add to, or anybody else? Do you all have anything to say or explain why we see this triangle here, which is the illusion you want?
Sir, I just said that it is because of our brain's tendency to fill in the gaps. Like even if there are random lines, but we can see that there are three vertices and the lines are arranged in such a way that maybe it can form a triangle. So our brain automatically fills in the knowledge which is pre-acquired by it and makes us see that there are actually just two triangles, and you're not able to see it because there is a triangle, a white triangle above the black one, and it just gives a 3D image to it. This
Yeah, okay. Right. So let's hear a couple of more formal jargons or terminologies about it. So there are two or three things that you need to remember. One is there's something called lateral inhibition here. So this happens because, when you have these multiple adjacent cells in the retina, which is in your eye, what happens is when you have two cells side by side, they inhibit each other. So it's essentially you have one cell in between and you have a bunch of cells around it. It's going to inhibit all the surroundings. Inhibit means in biological or neural terms, this is going to reduce the possibility of the activity from the surrounding cells. The technical word for that is neural firing. So it is going to reduce the possibility of neural firing, or it's sometimes called this attenuate neural firing around the cells, which is surrounding the one that you're talking about. So you have one cell in the middle, you have multiple cells surrounding it. What happens is typically the cell in the middle reduces the possibility for the other cells to fire. And what happens accordingly is you form a contour around it. So if, for example, you are seeing this here, this image is being formed in your retina, and what's happening when an image is being formed in the retina, there are certain cells in the retina that is responsible to code this aspect of the image. Whichever cells code this aspect, the cells which are around it is going to they are not going to fire, or they are not going to be active. Now, if they are not active, then and because they were supposed to code something adjacent in space, eventually you have an area in the space where, like here, in this area, which is illusory because there's nothing, no line here, but you still see a line because there's some kind of contention happening in the retinal cells inside your eyes. So it's a very retinal based explanation which has nothing really to do or not too much to do with the brain, but it's happening because of the way the cells in the retina itself works before these signals are transmitted to your brain. So that is called inhibition. Lateral because it's beside, inhibition because it reduces the possibility of activity or possibility of firing. So persistence due to tendency of adjacent cells in the retina to inhibit surrounding cells and hence attenuating contours. So these contours that get created or that you see is because of the firings inside the retina of your cell, of your eyes. Now the second view, which is called the cognitive bionomics view, which says that something which somebody was saying, that we are kind of born evolutionarily to figure out patterns, and the way we do figure out patterns is to see edges, because edges eventually help us see form and moving forms help us see motion. Now we do need edges as a starting point biologically for us to be able to perceive forms and then eventually have a sense of moving forms which are in motion. That's a biological necessity for us to survive. So that's another explanation which was also somewhat given to by one of your friends. This is called the cognitive bionomics view. Now here this is what's important, which is I think what Puri was saying. Even in the absence of real lines, which is here, there's no real line. Fabricating lines from partial information is useful because it's better to fill in this line, and instead of saying, well, I don't know what this is, we at least try to say predict, well, probably this is a triangle. What we have done it, we have essentially filled in the line when it does not exist. And Ramachandran, who is a neuroscientist, says that one of the purpose for this kind of a visual perception is that it's a means to cancel the effects of camouflage. So one way camouflage works, camouflage, I hope many of you know, it is when something is there but you are not able to detect it. So most insects have camouflage, and snakes have camouflage, where they try to merge within the environment. So you have, similar color on their skin or certain kinds of patterns on their skin so that the predators or something which is dangerous for that organism is not able to detect the organism. So our ability to fuse with the environment is called camouflage, one major explanation of camouflage. Um, in army, if you remember, most of the armies of the world actually have khaki and green as part of their uniform because a lot of people actually fight in in the in the jungles, and that helps them to camouflage, which is to stop them from being detected. Similarly, when the fighting is happening in the snow, which is what happens in our Siachen area, most of the uniform is white, which again helps in camouflage. So camouflage essentially is a thing that we have borrowed from the animal kingdom and we have now extensively used in security and defense. But the overall idea that Ramachandran says, why we do this, we fill in lines or we fabricate them when they don't exist, is because we want to detect whether there is something camouflaged in it. So we want to detect a possible triangle that we can't see, and that helps us as a predator to catch on prey which might be using camouflage. So these four slightly related but different, conceptually different points are important inputs to understand why we see this triangle. One is we see it because of the way our retina works, which is a lateral inhibition explanation. The second is we see it because we are hardwired to see edges, which is a cognitive bionomics view. The third is that it's useful, so it's more of a pragmatic explanation that even when the lines are not there, we want to fill it in because it's pragmatically useful to do it. And Ramachandran says it's useful because it helps us to detect camouflage. All right, so you should remember all of these three observations or rather interesting points that try to explain why is it the case that we see contours when they don't exist, which are illusory in nature. Okay, so let me proceed further. When you talk about visual patterns or forms, yeah.
If there were complete black lines, the black triangle was drawn completely, then
Mhm.
also the illusion will work, or then we can't observe any illusion.
If you have a black line, then you are bringing that circle on the top, right? So you would still probably fill in this aspect which is not line there, and probably my guess is you are going to see this white triangle as the bottom figure, and the black triangle is going to become the top figure. Currently it's the opposite perceptually, right? So it's again it's giving us a perception of depth when there is none, or there need not be any, but the way it's drawn, it gives you a perception of depth.
Okay, sir.
So
Sir,
yeah.
sir, I mean, we saw. So could you just go to the previous slide in which there were three, the mentioned? No, sir, the points mentioned. Yeah, sir, in the cognitive bionomics view, we know that there's the need to see edges, and but again, how do we know that this is the right edge which needs to be formed? Like, oh, it's still, isn't it still a bit vague? That, like, yeah, we need to see edges, and yes, according to the pattern, this triangle is the simplest we can think of. But can't there be more?
Yeah, indeed, it's a very interesting question. So, as it turns out, that there's one theory, which is the Guyon's theory, which I will cover. It says that there's actually not too many possible ways of detecting edges, because there are a very limited number of possible geometrical shapes that's there in the world. And now, probably what we might be ending up doing is, if let's say there are 24 geometrical shapes possible, I try to predict which is the shape which is most likely based on the way I have observed the world, which reduces the probability of certain shapes simply because they are less common.
Okay.
So the same way that you are able to predict what's coming next, in computers or even in other areas, we also predict what's coming or what's in front of us based on multiple considerations, and one of that is familiarity. Or it could also be dependent on the other stuff that's around it. So it's, what else could this be? I mean, the probability of some other possible figure here, because of the other figures or because of the commonality of triangle and circles as predominant figures in the world, automatically makes this as the most probable ones. But of course, you are right that it need not be the correct one, because you could always have a less probable one which is the correct one. But in probability, you just predict, and in you think of likelihood, and this one probably has more likelihood as a
Yeah.
triangle.
Okay. 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 Right.
Yeah. Now, if you think about visual pattern recognition, which is what we have been doing over the last 3 classes, the core question essentially is, we have to now spell out the cognitive processes that accounts for our ability to understand patterns. So now we need to have cognitive process, hopefully, which can even be programmed. Um, well, not even hopefully, now we have programmed a lot of that, because the field of visual um, you know, visual computing or vision science is well established, and we have been able to implement many of these programs to see patterns, to count numbers and crowds, and even more intricate ones to figure out whether something is good or bad by looking at the picture, search pictures based on pictures. So we have made a lot of progress around understanding visual patterns and forms, both at the psychological level and also at the computational level. But the most large scale categorization of what probably is going on in our brains is to say, either you are doing bottom up processing or you're doing top down processing. So for bottom-up processing, the idea is you eventually get to understand or recognize a pattern based on what are the individual patterns that make up the overall larger form. That's bottom up. So you start from the below and then you integrate them as you go hierarchically up. The reverse of that is top down, where you first have some kind of a again a prediction or a reason to believe that this is the kind of pattern that I'm going to see, and then go further down towards these individual parts. So here, for example, if you again think about it, if I would work my way up from the edge towards the pattern, that's a bottom-up processing. If I have a chance, if I have a reason to believe or predict that probably this is a circle, and then I go on to see whether this has a circle. If not, then I fill in the edge. That's a top-down processing. To make it even more explicit, this is a typical exercise that you do. First question is, what is this thing?
Nose.
No.
All right. So could it be anything else?
Lower part of bone.
One part of a bone.
Or
Okay.
an elephant trunk.
Elephant's trunk. Well, it's still a nose.
The pattern behind the arrow of a bow and arrow. Backside of an arrow.
Okay. Now you're getting really creative about this. Okay. See, now here's the question. Why did it seem to be, or why did most people think it's a nose the first time you saw it without too much of deliberation?
Sir, because even if we consider it individually, every entity, then probably, but since they are in a collective, since we are perceiving it in a group, so probably you on down that line. I guess.
So, I mean, yeah.
So first of all, we saw like if we get only one of the figure, like the first one, there will be there will be difficulty in identifying what thing is this. Then if we get all the things collectively in a group, then we will get a better idea, and then we can say, yeah, it is no. So from here
Okay.
So I
So,
think that even if you
That it
saw
was
one of them, it might seem like a nose only, because like we are generally very good at seeing facial features like eyes, nose, ear. So that might be the first thing we see.
We can say it's like a bottom-up perception. We are starting from a thing and then analyzing the whole thing.
So if we turn the laptop upside down, then I guess I could see some faces also, emojis type of thing.
okay. Yeah, that's really cool. I never thought about that. The turning part. But see, there are a couple of interesting points from your answers. Number one single answer seems to have a higher probability than others, in line with what I was just saying in response to the previous slide's question. Second, there's clearly some additional information you are getting, or some people of at least are saying that you're getting, when you are seeing multiple of this instead of a randomly one of that. And third, it also shows how, if we agree that these are noses, it also shows that how varied it could be. It's pretty varied. Of course, only this one is a really varied one. Maybe it's more like a trunk, as somebody said. But many others probably has nose as one of its high priority answers, or at least among one of the answers. So yes, so the first question somebody already said about bottom up. One question is, how is it possible that we are able to perceive all of these as noses, although technically they are different drawings? That's one thing we have to explain. Second is, what happens, what additional information we get when we see them in a group compared to a single one. And third is the starting thing that I asked with, why does nose become more probable compared to some other responses? So any thoughts in all these three? Questions?
Sir, as we have a image in our mind that the nose narrows from the upside and it start broadening from the downside, so it look like a when we see it, our brain interprets it like a nose, and there are also looking as the two holes in the bottom,
Mm-hmm.
so that
So
we yes.
yeah, so there are different characteristics from this picture that are constant across the drawings that help you generalize, is what you're saying. So would that be a bottom-up processing or would it be a top-down process?
But I
I
think
mean,
it's a
anybody else also can
top-down
answer this.
top-down process. Narrow at the narrow above and a bit thicker below.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so maybe we'll come back to it after I give out the theories and then we'll try to explain it. Let's proceed. So the basic difference between bottom up and top down um, is this, that you have to start from somewhere, right? So the question is what comes first. So technically what you're doing in a computational terminology is parsing. You are parsing a stimuli into multiple parts, or you're parsing the overall thing into multiple parts with these multiple things, but each of these you're also parsing, where you're seeing the nose, you're seeing these lines on the top, you're seeing the lines at the bottom. So the question is what comes first? Is it the case that both top down and bottom up processing are both happening? And if both are happening, then something has to happen first. So how do we decide which one happens first? And there are people who have argued both ways. Some said top down happens first, some says bottom up happens first. Most people agree that both top down and bottom up happens in real life when you are looking at something, but the academic debate is whether top down is first or bottom up is first. Now, Palmer, who is a very well-known psychologist, vision scientist actually, says that it's a futile question. What happens really is there's an interaction between top down and bottom simultaneously. So it's not like the top down processing completes and then the bottom up processing starts. Top down and bottom up processing is interacting with each other simultaneously at any instant of time when we are looking at something. So this negates this first question about what comes first and renders it futile. The second thing that Palmer says is expectations or goals based on real world knowledge guide identification of objects and hinders identification in inappropriate ones. So nose here, let's hear it from you. So this part, our real world knowledge, if that's guiding our identification of the previous stimuli as a nose, also has to hinder or attenuate or negate identification of inappropriate one. This is wrong, it's inappropriate. So, this is doing two things. One is it's increasing the probability that this is a nose. It is also decreasing the probability that it is something else, like the bow, for example, that somebody said. It could also be the leg of an animal, but nobody said that. So clearly, there are certain expectations or goals, which is based on real world knowledge, that help us identify a certain object, and automatically identification of one or identification with one hinders identification with others less likely. So number one, both are happening simultaneously, top down and bottom up, according to Palmer. Second is probably nose being a more, highly occurring stimuli in our world renders it more possible or probable than something else like um, let's say the feet of an animal, like a dog, for example, or a trunk of an elephant. That is what Palmer tells it, says about bottom up and versus top down. However, it still has a probability that it would have different other kinds of explanations. And in our class, we had only two, but are there any others that you can think about? And I said a third one, which is the leg of a animal, probably, but could there be other stuff? Well, even if you can't think about right now, but look at this question then. If we change it from what is this to what part of a face is this, there's very, very less possibility that you will say anything apart from a nose. In fact, the other responses like my response and two other responses of the class will also not be correct response anyway, because they cannot be part of a face. So once you ask this question, what part of a face, you automatically involve top-down processing, because now you start off with a very small subset and you already have started off with a goal to trying to merge this drawing with a part of a face, which was not the case here. So probably here you would start off with bottom up, whereas here you would start out with top down. However, for both here and here, please remember that both top down and bottom up processing is happening and they are interacting with each other. That is what Palmer is saying. Any question?
Sir, please explain again top down and bottom up. It's
Okay. Sorry, I missed it. What's your question?
Sir, please again explain the top down and bottom up.
Oh, so see here again. A bottom up is initiated by the parts of the pattern. So here, if I'm looking at whether whether these you interpret as wholes, whether you interpret this as a more, larger contour compared to this one, then this is bottom up, because you're looking at individual parts of the overall figure. That is bottom, and you're going up from there to conclude about the figure. That's why it's called bottom up. So you start out with individual parts and then you build up towards the larger figure. And this is not just visual. You can do the same thing in auditory. When you have multiple beats in the song or in the music, you are integrating the multiple beats to eventually come up to a pattern in the song or in the music. That's bottom up. Top down is recognition of the whole leads to understanding its parts. So I understand this overall as a nose, and because I start off with the nose, which is the whole, which is the top, I start there and then I look at its individual parts. So I start with the whole, recognition of the whole, and then I lead to the individual parts. That's top down. So what I was saying is, when you ask this question, where you say what is this and you pose this stimuli, you typically will do bottom-up processing more because you don't know what this is. So you start looking out to individual patterns until to try to see whether the patterns are similar across these different drawings. And if they are, then you start to conclude, well, it looks like a nose. Whereas here, you would probably do more of top-down processing, where you automatically start out with a goal to identify these patterns with a part of a face. And here it's extremely unlikely that there is any other answer apart from nose, and hence you start out with trying to search for a nose. So that's why it's top down. So it depends on from where you are starting, but it does not mean that that's ending and then you are moving forward, because as Palmer says, top down and bottom up processing interacts. So you do a little bit of top down, then you do a little bit of bottom up, then again you do a little bit of bottom up, then you do a little bit of top down, and eventually both top down and bottom up together help us perceive this as an individual or the whole group as a certain category of stimuli, which here turns out to be nose. Is it clear? Or clearer at least? Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So you were saying that top-down approach or bottom-up approach. So, but how actually the researcher or the psychologist gets to know that that person used that approach, or top-to-down approach or bottom-to-top approach? Means there is any device or something scanning of the mind that is done to see this his mind is doing in working that way differently, so he would have used top to down approach, or so, means how is it actually identified?
This is a very good question. I'm very glad that you asked this question. Let me tell a couple of things. One is whenever scientists um, create these explanations, these are computational explanations, right? So there is no physical manifestation of a computation, because you are proposing that this is probably the process through which it's working, but you can't see the process. However, you as a skeptic or I as a skeptic can ask, how do you know that people are doing bottom-up processing or top-down processing? And that's why I think this is a very good question. Now, you don't know a direct way to measure it, but there are the indirect ways to handle this thing. One indirect way I think that will be relevant is to look at eye tracking. So you see where you are looking at when you're looking at this picture. If you are zooming in means if you are looking at these intricate details about specific parts of the figure, and that I know where you're looking at because I'm tracking your eye, then I can conclude that probably, not for sure, probably you are looking at the parts of the picture. And from there, again, your eyes zoom out and you look at this overall thing. So we can measure top-down and bottom-up processing, not directly in the brain or well, you can't really measure anything in the mind anyway. So you don't measure it directly in the brain, but you use different other tools as a proxy to measure what's happening in the brain. The other way to do it is probably to devise some very cool uh, computer-based experiments where people have done things like reducing certain parts of the figure, basically erasing certain parts of the figure, and then see at what point you can't say what this is. So that means that you need these certain aspects of the figure to be able to conclude something about it. And here it will turn out experimentally, if you do it, I believe, is if you remove certain parts of the figure, more people will be confused seeing this, and less people will say it's a nose after I have erased certain parts compared to, sorry, more number of people will say it's a nose if I erase certain parts of this slide, because I already have a cue that this is part of a face. So that shows that automatically I have a top-down goal to match this pattern with something of a face. And even if I remove certain parts of the figure, it is not leading me to confusion. But in this case,
Mohit, could you mute yourself, please?
whereas for this figure, if you see and if you remove certain parts from the figure, many more people will not be able to say that this is a nose. So that is an indirect way to show that probably people are using more of bottom-up processing, because if you remove cues to bottom-up processing from this figure, you fail. But if you remove cues to bottom-up processing from this figure, you don't fail. And that is an indirect way to perhaps say that probably you are not failing because I have a top-down goal set to look at this or to search for this pattern in the face. Of course, now if you start removing a whole lot from the pattern, then eventually nobody can say what this is for either of these two slides. But yes, this you don't have a direct measure for any cognitive process actually across whole of psychology. We do experiments, or we measure behavior, or we measure certain proxies of behavior, like what your eyes are doing or what your eyes are looking at, or sometimes even neural activity when you are doing a certain behavior, and try to say that that is a proxy of the actual computation or the cognitive process that's happening inside your head. You don't get a direct measure of any cognitive process because they don't really exist, apart from being in existence because of the theoretical or the computational explanation. So likewise, you don't you don't see the logic of a program, right? You see the outcome of the logic of a program in machines, as an analogy. Does that help?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. But this is a very, very important point that you raised. Okay, so now there are 4 theories that talk about how we make sense of different forms, and all the 4 are very important. So I will quickly run through all the 4. First one is called the Gestalt theory. Somebody already wrote Gestalt in the chat. So if you know it, very good. Gestalt theories essentially say that we try to make sense of the entire configuration from their membership to the whole. So we try to make sense of this as a nose because of how this line, this line, and this line, and this line are a member of the overall figure. I'll give you better examples than that as we proceed. The second theory is about template matching. So we match what we are seeing with some kind of a mental representation of the same thing that is there in our head. So we see this and we try to match, oh, is this closest to what? And then we say, oh, this is closest to a nose. Now, how do I know what's a nose? We store a mental representation or a representation of a nose in our head. And when we see something like this, we try to compare that representation that's there in our head with this thing that I see here. And if it's a match, I am able to say, well, this is a nose. So that's why it's a template. That's why the name is called template matching. The third theory is called prototype theory, which means that I don't store all these different things as noses, but I have stored one single nose. Maybe for a human, perhaps this is the best drawing. Now this is a prototypical nose. That's why it's called prototype theory. And any other noses that I see, I try to match with my prototype nose. If it is little deviant from there, then fine. I still consider that as a nose. But if it deviates too much from there, then I say it's something else, it's not a nose. So I store one, I don't store all the noses in prototype, the difference between prototype theory and template matching theory. And the fourth type of theories is feature analysis, which means that I analyze different features, which is a bottom-up view. So I analyze the whole, the curvature here and this line here. These are different features. And through that feature analysis, I eventually conclude that the form that I see is that of a nose. Okay, and now let me quickly go through all these 4 different theories, and then we can ask questions if you have. So first comes Gestalt theory. The Gestalt theorists are actually a very important group of psychologists who said essentially the way we perceive the world, or we perceive different patterns of the world or different forms in the world, are pretty constant. It's not colored by religion and culture and demographics and education and whatnot. So that is why, again, here you see an illusory contour. And most people will see this as a triangle, irrespective of which country they're coming from. Why? Because according to Gestalt psychologists, their overall theory is that the stimuli work together. It's not that you are separately looking at different parts of the figure. You're looking at the whole thing together. And hence, you find this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dots as if they are hanging together. So this is more probable to be a line than these 1, 2, 3 dots probably as a line. However, when you go here, now this probably looks like a line compared to this one. The difference between these two is that the actual spatial difference between the dots are lesser. So if the dots are lesser, if the difference between the dots are lesser, they are hanging in together. And that hanging in together creates an impression of being together or working together. And hence, automatically, we perceive this as one line and we perceive this as one line, but we don't perceive this one as a line or this one as a line. Now, this sense goes away in number 3 when all are equidistant from each other. We now start seeing this as a grid. We don't see this as a line as much as we do here. We don't even see this as a line if they are equidistant from each other. So this is one of their principles of similarity. This is about equal fate. that when you see, all of this, the difference between them are colors. So these are black and these are white. Because these are black, and that's why it's called the principle of common fate. By the way, I asked one of the TAs to send a write-up or something about Gestalt psychology. I don't think it's there. In the readings that's there, so we have to send that to them, so that the 5 principles of Gestalt psychology they know. Otherwise, it's not possible to remember. The and they have 5 such principles. So one is about closure, which is what you see here. And this again is illusory, right? So everybody or most people think of this as a circle, and this as some rectangular or a circular or a square piece, but it's illusory because it's not complete. But Gestalt psychologists say that we are born with this Gestalt principle of closure, which means whenever it's required, we close the figure, which means that we draw or fill in lines where they don't exist. Similar to what you would do here, you would also do here, because of the way that perception works. And this is a principle of perception, one of the principles of perception given by Gestalt psychologists. Closure is one, similarity is one, common fate is one, um, and there are 2 more, which I am forgetting right now what they are. But we'll send these 5 things to you, and this will then be used by you all to explain the illusory contour of this figure here.
Sir? Sir,
But
in
why
figure,
yeah, sorry. You have a
sir,
question?
in figure A, why don't we prefer to complete the 3 circles and not the triangle? That could be one way to perceive it as 3 circles by completing them rather than looking for a triangle.
Yeah, so you're right. So now these 6 principles are not equally placed hierarchically. So whichever is ecologically more valuable, that's the one we are going to use. If there are more than one principles that you can apply, you would be ending up applying the one that seems to be most ecologically valid to apply for. But yeah, we could, but we don't. Why we don't? There must be an ecological reason why filling up this as a triangle is actually better for us to do than filling the triangles up, than filling the circles up.
Sir, in figure D, is there any explanation on like how much we can increase the gaps in the circles until we stop seeing it as a circle? Like it's appearing like a circle right now.
Yeah, so I don't know of a quantitative answer to that, but you can
It
do
might
it.
be subjective, I guess, but like most people will see this as a circle. But if it was like the gaps are very large, most will see it as not a circle. But
Right.
then is there any middle area on that?
No, I'm not aware of a quantitative level after which something starts looking as that thing. But it's true whatever you're saying, that it's not like all the time, I mean, keeping on increasing, you are going to keep on seeing it as a circle. In fact, that is about the 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 same principle here, right? So if things are closer to each other, they hang in. So it has to be close enough. Now, what is that enough? Quantitatively, I don't know, but it has to be close enough such that they are hanging together, and hence I perceive this as a circle, and I end up going and closing it. But experimentally, we can find it out, I think, by keeping on reducing the gap, increasing the gaps till the point people say this is not a circle.
Yes, sir. That
And
could.
yeah.
So can we say this is a total top-down and intuitive approach?
Intuitive word I have not used till now, so let's avoid doing it. It's another complicated word. Yeah, but it has to be, well, it's I think Palmer is right. There always is an interaction between top down and bottom up. You can start out with bottom up, sorry, you can start out with top down saying, I have a principle to close, or I have a principle of closure or similarity, but to be, it's not going to be enough to explain why I see this as a circle, because of the point which was just now mentioned, the gap which is going to come from processing of the stimuli itself is going to be a bottom-up process. So we do a little bit of top-down, we do a little bit of bottom-up, and then we do both. That's I think the correct explanation, instead of either only top-down or only bottom-up.
So, sir, like we use the word close in this in this case. So, isn't that like a little bit like from a scientific point of view, it's somewhat vague, like because the definition of that word is unclear. Like how what does close mean exactly? Like how close?
No, so Gestalt psychologists essentially try to say that these are 6 principles of perception, and this is how perception works. Now they don't, and they say we have a principle of closure where if things hang around very close to each other, we will end up going and completing the figure. That's the point of closing the figure. So we have a propensity for closure, is what they say. And that's all they say, really. They don't define under what circumstances or how much of the differences there should be between constituent elements that will stop us from using the closure principle.
Okay, sir.
But what I was saying is you could do it experimentally, empirically, by trying to start here and then slowly reducing pixel by pixel and keep on presenting them to people and say, do you see a triangle? And at some point people will say, no, I cannot see a triangle. So then that's your point.
Yes, sir. Maybe somebody might have already done this experiment.
Sure. I mean, they have. I mean, there's a whole area in psychophysics which essentially does that. You keep on changing properties of the stimuli till the stimuli does not remain the stimuli anymore. It is called psychophysics because you use physical or you use the principles of physics to study psychology. And many people who started the field of psychophysics actually came from physics or mathematics, not from psychology. I mean, this was very hot in 40s, 50s, 60s, but still now it's a very important aspect of understanding the perception, and people regularly do it even today. Yeah, sorry, somebody had a question or point to make? No. All right. So what is the overall point of Gestalt psychologists? So the key point is that cognition is ecological. It's not, it's not something that you study inside the lab. It is what is in the world. So ecological means it is out there in the world. And here one example to show that by Gestalt psychologists was that however much you try, it's very difficult to see. It's very difficult not to see the pattern here. So most people see this and this as this because these things hang together, these things hang together, and these things hang together, giving the sense of a pattern of three rows of beads hanging. Whereas here, you cannot see such a pattern because now we have just equidistantly placed each other, which comes from the principle of Gestalt principles. But additionally, what they are saying is, even if you try, it's very hard for you not to see this as a pattern. So it's not that cognition is happening completely based on what's the control mechanism in your brain. It's also happening because of the way the world is, or because of the way the patterns exist in the world. And here our world is this, what we see right now on the screen. Because the patterns are as such, as you see on the screen, we are bound to, or our brains, our minds are kind of pushed to see that there are these beads, or this is one column and this is one column and this is one column. Whereas here we see this whole thing as a column because of the way the stimuli is, not because anything additional about it. So they make this point to say that cognition is in the world, essentially, which is what is ecological. The second thing that Gestalt psychologists, well, among the many things that they say, is that the perceptual system is always looking for alternative organizations. So it says that, the initial idea was spontaneous organization was a property of the stimuli itself, which means that this initial organization, which means that automatically you see this as a grid, whereas here you see this as 3 different columns, is a property of the stimuli itself. But recent findings show that it is also heavily based on prior memories, which, by the way, is how you all talked about the number of pots in the archaeological dig in our first class activity on perception. So on one side, it's true that this is the world and this is how it is. It's also true that what we see is driven, spontaneously driven by the stimuli itself. And that is not all, which was the case for previous thinkers. Now we know that it is also heavily driven by past memories. And here is one explanation to prove that, which is taken from a book. So this is exactly the same language or the same text or same words, but all that changes is the backdrop, or rather the background of the picture. Right, so here this becomes the background, which is a white background. Here this becomes white background, and it completely obviously changes the semantics. If you read this as stop war peace now, and you read this as stop peace war now. But if this would be completely based on the stimuli itself, which is also true, because the whole point of us reading stop war is because of the way this 2 words now fit together. So Gestalt psychologists would say they are fitting together because of ecologically the background being of the same stuff, which is white, and here it's of gray, which has nothing really to do with your memory of of other stuff. It's because of the background that I read this as stop war and peace now, and this is again because of the background I read as stop peace and war now. It is somewhat colored by my memory if I start figuring out that probably one of these is more possible. So for example, if we are staying in Afghanistan, then probably stop peace war now might seem to be a more relevant thing. If we are in some other country, probably stop war peace now might actually be of more probability, even though I have this as one background and this as one background. So both of these 2 things are really in place in the real world. One is it is driven heavily by the stimulus. So here you see it is driven by the background of the stimulus. It is also a lot of times driven by the memory or other goals that we have, which are sometimes even contextually driven goals based on where you are currently located. Any question?
So why it is the ecological? We can't say it is because of the similarity.
Sorry, I missed that. Can you repeat it?
So we say that it is the ecological. We say, read the stop war peace now. Difference in the color. You say it is the ecological.
So Gestalt psychologists would say that because the background here is white, which is that itself is there in the stimuli, right? You don't have to do anything about it. The stimuli is such that you have this on the white background and here you have this on the gray background. Because of the background, we automatically read stop war and peace now because ecologically it makes sense to do it, simply because it's easier for us to categorize stop and war based on having a similar background, and peace and now based on a similar background. Similarly here again, same thing we do, and hence we end up reading here as stop peace war now and here as stop war peace now. And this has used in marketing also, in consumer marketing and in designing a lot, that automatically we want people to read something. You can also use this as some kind of sarcasm if you want to, and make people read certain things which is opposite to what you want to read. But these are things that you do depending on what you want to achieve. But as far as perception is concerned, especially Gestalt psychology is concerned, they are saying that is a similarity principle. Here the similarity principle is same background, both here and here. So the same background is working as similarity principle for me to read this as stop war and peace now, and this as stop peace and war now.
Sir,
Yes.
let's suppose we add a vertical line in between the first banner or the this yes sir. So then also the pattern of reading and understanding what is written, what someone perceives remain same, or will it create a type of confusion there?
It will create a confusion because now you are not allowing the principle of similarity to work in the enough efficiency level as it's working at this point.
Okay, sir.
All right, so now here this is the second theory, which is called template matching. So as you can see, all of these are different ways you can write an A, and this was actually a big problem in computer science, especially when OCR machines were invented a couple of decades back, because these kinds of things were written and you wanted a computer to scan it and read it. The problem is you have different fonts, and all these different fonts had one possibility is you program all these different fonts for people to understand that whichever font you use, this is an A. However, for humans, many people read all these different fonts very easily. Now we have to explain how we are able to do it. A computer is not able to do it, or at least were not able to do it at that point in time. Now we have fixed that. The template matching theory of perception says, well, you essentially have a large number of templates because you learn different things. So you have all these different templates to represent A because you have seen A being written in different ways through your experiences and memory. So now you have a large number of representations of A, and you have different templates of A. Every time you see an A, you match it. If it's a match with any of these templates, then it's a hit or it's a successful match. And you say, oh, this is an A. If eventually you have an A and it does not match with any of the template of A that you have in your head, say for example, this is a very, very unlikely A, or this could also be a very unlikely A, or this could also be a very unlikely A. If you see this and you don't have a template like this in your head, then you cannot recognize this to be an A, or even this one, for example. But if you do, then you would be able to recognize this as an A. So most of all these templates are associated with meaning. You do a search and match. If a specific match occurs, then essentially you are successful. If it is not, then you are not. Can anybody say what's the problem with this approach?
Sir, doesn't this approach depend on every individual's upbringing of his mind in one sense, as in like what all templates has he seen beforehand? So,
It does. It does. In fact, that is still not. Well, it will. I mean, it's not a problem for the theory because it says fine. It depends on your exposure. So if you have seen only one kind of A, you will not be able to recognize any other kind of A. Or if you have seen 10 kinds of A, then you will be able to recognize 10 kinds of A's. So it's not a real problem with the theory per se. This is how the theory is. But but you're right. But there's also a real problem if this is how we want to say, this is how we understand patterns or how we understand form, by having templates of each form in our head and multiple templates of that. If we don't have the template, we won't be able to understand the form, which necessitates us to have a large number of templates for each and every form. And of course, we have large number of forms. So we have large number of templates for large number of forms. So how are we going to do this search? And also, how many of such templates do we have to store? So the strength is, it is an intuitive sense of external to internal search. It's a very simple algorithm, and probably We do it at certain points in time, but the weakness is that a one-to-one search is very, very costly. We want to have an exact match with the template, with what the form I'm seeing. Only then I'm able to recognize the form. And obviously, if it's a one-to-one, any misalignment is not going to accommodate it. So when I read card, CRD versus card in capital and in small, or in caps up and caps down, they are two separate things as far as the template matching theory is concerned. Now that creates a problem. You don't want to say that we have a whole lot of ways I can write C in my head, and then I go and match and say, oh, can I find this kind of C in my head? Oh yes, I have. Then this is a C. Similarly, I do with A and R and D, and then again I do it for small letters. Then I do it for different kinds of other scripts, different kinds of fonts and all that. And we are just stuck with letters here. We have much more complex representations of forms that we know people are able to do. And obviously, it's also extremely time consuming to have so many templates. So these are the weaknesses of template matching theory. What's the alternative? So the alternative to template matching theory is a Guion theory, which says that essentially we have a fixed number, which is 24 Guions, which are 24 geometrical shapes in the world. And each of these geometrical shapes, which are each of these Guions, come together to create new objects or create objects. So here the telephone that you see is created by 3 Guions, number 1, number 5, and number 3. Similarly for every single object. And it turns out that you can create 1.4 billion 3 Guion objects. 3 Guions means when you use 3 Guions like this, examples here, you can create 1.4 billion such combinations. It also turns out that we might have used about 30,000 of them, but we name much fewer. We probably have names for about 3,000 of such. So the geometrical possibilities of creating creating objects from Guions seems a very possible reality, and probably that's how objects are. Most of the objects that we see in the world are actually a mixed match of multiple smaller objects according to Guion theory. And we can create a large number of such possible objects, which is also great. Additionally, what you can also do is you can create new Guions by small transformations. So you start out with an ellipsoid, and then with one kind of transformation, you can create the ellipsoid into a cylinder. With another kind of transformation, you can create the cylinder into a tapered cylinder, or you can create the cylinder into a curved cylinder. You can take the cylinder and do some other kinds of conversions and convert a cylinder to a cuboid, and then you can taper a cuboid or bend a cuboid. So if you start off with an ellipsoid, by the way, also turns out to be one of the most common geometrical shapes in the universe, and you can actually form multiple geometrical shapes from ellipsoid. You can then create 24 of such shapes and then add them up to create objects. And if you just take 3 out of these 24 and arrange it in multiple combinations, you really can create a large number of objects. So Guion theory says that it is much more productive if you think of the world as constituted of Guions and our brain to be able to figure out how the Guions have come together to create objects. To test for Guion theory, this is an experimental test for Guion theory. What people have done is, this is a cup. If you show this to people, most people say it's a cup. If you show this to people, by the way, this is also related to the question that was asked before about the nose. Here, many people say it's a cup. If you show this to people, hardly anybody says it's a cup. So Guion theory explains pattern recognition or form perception by saying, because we look out for Guions, at some point in time when I cannot make out whether it has a Guion or which is the Guion that it has, I cannot recognize the whole object at all. That is true for all the other objects. So this has 100% success rate. This might be about 80% or 70%. This will fall to chance, 40%, 50%, maybe even drop to 20%. If you show this, people cannot say this is a cup. If you show this, very less number of people will be able to say it's a scissor. If you show this, very less number of people will be able to say a stool. Why? Because Gion theorists say, well, you are not able to figure out which are the Gions here and how the Gions are coming together to create the object. Okay, any question?
Sir?
Yeah.
It means whenever first in our life we saw a strange object for the first time in our life, suppose I saw an Almira for the first time, I would have divided that into a form that has been made up of many Geon objects. Then suppose for the next time I saw a different means a different model of an Almira, then I would have in my mind recalled those geon forms that I had divided the earlier object and tried to figure out that do these look similar to this one, and have then concluded that this is also an Almira. Like that happens.
No. So that what you just said is very closer to the next theory that I want to talk about. Well, next to next. But yeah, let me take that question a little later. Let's finish the other possible theories. I mean, sometimes they are not independent of each other. So don't think that when we understand form or when we understand objects, there's only one theory that is the only way we process the world. It's possible that there are different kinds of cognitive processes um, um, which you can extract from different theories and create a hybrid theory of your own and say none of these theories are complete. Let me take different aspects of it and then create a new hybrid theory which explains better than any of the individual theories. That's always one way to do it. But of course, theorists fight against each other. But one thing before I proceed, one misunderstanding is Gions are not in your head. Gions are in the world. So, they are saying the world, the physical world, essentially is made up of Gions. Our brain tries to perceive the Gions. We don't make up the Gions. The Gions are out there in the world. We perceive the Gions and we perceive an object to be made up of the Gions. But the physical reality of the world is such that the world is made up of small parts. That small parts are each Gions, and there are 24 such small parts. Think about language, right? So you have 26 alphabets. Every single English, every single sentence you create or every single word you create, which is supposed to be an infinite set, is created from a finite set of 26 alphabets. Similarly, every object that is there or will ever be created in the world, which the set is infinite, but it is going to be created by a combination of these 24 Gions. That's a limited set or that's a finite set.
Sir, I have a doubt. So we are talking about everything, even in the upcoming future, will be interpreted. I mean, as like will be made of Gion in these 24 Gion.
This is a physical part, all right. So this is not anything psychological about it.
Yeah.
So this is like pure physics.
Okay, yes. But so what happens is sometimes you conjure up something in your mind, you think of something, or the authors, they write a book in which they explain something different, totally different. So they have thought about that thing, but and have written about it, but we can't seem to visualize it. So does that mean that it is not perceived, not perceived as one of made from one of these Gions, or I mean they have thought of something which cannot be visualized, right?
Yeah, that's the problem, right? So I mean there are certain things which cannot be visualized. There are certain things which even you can't even model visually.
Yeah, we can't make
because of
a
dimensionalities
physical,
and
okay,
other kinds of physical properties um, of the thing. But if it is three-dimensional. So this is, by the way, only three-dimensional, right?
Okay.
If it's four-dimensional or five-dimensional, you can't. So if it is three-dimensional, then there is no reason why you cannot represent it.
But I mean, those things which they describe, they are three-dimensional. They have given a sort of a vague description, but they can't actually
Like what?
draw
Can you give an
or
example?
give an example. Like okay, I would I would have to think of it. But like consider any fictional new world which is made by an author, and he describes that sometimes in the early books what people did was they just gave its name, gave the things name, such as in the Hitchhiker's Guide there are many things which are just given names but not exactly described what they are, because it's not um, it's just a figment which they created. So even if it is three-dimensional and they thought of it, they would have thought of something, and since that something is three-dimensional, that would have been made of geons, but they still could not interpret it as made up of geons. So that's what I mean.
No. So this is a problem with language. So here you see there are 1.4 billion 3-geon objects possible to create mathematically. Nothing peculiar about it. You basically write program to do it. We typically use a very small subset of that because obviously there are many other possibilities. These are non-fictional, of course, but let's say your fictional example that you're saying is probably among this 1.4 billion, beyond this 30,000 that we see or use in our world. But you see that we have actually names for about 3,000. So perception does not require language. You can perceive something, but to be able to write about it or to be able to talk about it, you need language. So one problem with authors is how do I put that into words? And if there are no words for certain objects, then it's very hard to explain it. And you see that it's so less that we have words for. So the physical possibilities are way more than the number of words which are mapped to the physical possibilities.
Are these words mapped one on one? I mean, if the geons, if the object is made from various geons, we could use a paragraph description instead of a one-word description to describe the object or the certain element we are talking about.
People do that. People do that using some kind of analogies or similes and metaphors. There's a whole area which looks into metaphors to explain things that don't have a name for it. But still, you have to use known words to even metaphorically talk about it, right? So now you need, but there is no, I mean, that's why I asked for an example. There is no way there is something possible as a permutation from these geons that will not be 3D. Or rather, the other way is, if there is a 3D object, there is I don't know which 3D object would have, which you cannot decompose into a set of geons coming from this 24 geon set.
Okay.
And this is a physical, I mean, as I was saying, there is nothing psychological about it.
Okay.
Sir?
Yes?
Sir, according to Gion theory, how do we perceive our main building's roof, which is hyperbolic paraboloid?
We convert. I have not put in all the 24, right? So these are all different geons, by the way.
Okay,
yeah, sorry.
But how do we perceive by this Gion theory like the hyperbolic paraboloid shape of the roof of our main building?
You break it up. You don't perceive the whole form. So even in a simple example like the telephone, you don't perceive the whole telephone. You perceive it as made up of 3 geons. So you can break up most of the geometrical shapes into certain constituent shapes. even if that breaking up is happening at a very low level. I mean, it's not about how many parts you can break it up to. You can break it up in millions or billions of parts also, technically.
Okay, sir.
I think so. I mean, there might be something unique which I don't know about, which might be there in higher geometry, which I have not studied. But you can ask any mechanical engineering professor, perhaps, or a civil engineering professor, who, if that's any theoretical um, barrier to break up a complex shape. And if you come to know, please feel free to share in the class also. But I don't know. I mean, as much as I know, it seems to be possible, but maybe not. Maybe there is a mathematical impossibility at some point of engineering where you can't break it any further. But I don't know that.
Okay, sir.
Sure. The two other ones is one is called feature analysis, which is pattern recognition essentially, where you extract different features. So here, to understand arrow, I understand arrow as ARROW. So each of these are features that make up arrow as a stimuli. And we have a lot of neurological evidence from both eye movements and neuron firings that this is probably a um, very common way of how the brain makes sense of form. To give you an example, and this is a very simple example which was done many years back by Hubel and Wiesel, who got Nobel Prizes in biology or medicine, where they tried to measure neural responses. So neural response is firing, which means voltage fluctuation, from cells in your body. So here it can be from cells. This was, I think, from a monkey's brain. And they measured the number of, so this is spikes per second. So number of firings, this is spikes. Each of these are spikes. This is frequency. So this is number of spikes per second from a single or a bunch of neurons from a specific area in your brain or somebody's brain or even an animal's brain. What they observe is if you hold a bar like this horizontally, for those neurons, there was no firing at all silent. Firing means a voltage fluctuation, by the way. If you tilt it, there's a little bit of firing. There's a specific orientation, geometric orientation, where these neurons have maximum activity or maximum firing, which gives you where you have largest number of neural firings. So, and that's why you get a distribution here, which shows that every neuron in that area, or most neurons in that area, are coding uniquely for a certain geometrical orientation of this line, showing that there are certain features of this line that eventually help you to analyze the pattern. Here the pattern is of a certain angle of the line, which is a neural evidence to show or to prove that we do feature analysis. This is a feature, which is a geometrical feature, which is the angle of this line. And this is something that is happening in our brain, directly in our neurons, which is a very strong neural evidence to show that we do feature analysis. Okay, I'll quickly finish here. So the fourth one is prototype theory, which means that, like the nose example, we don't have all the templates, or we have a prototype or the best possible fit of a template, and we try to match whatever is coming with that prototype. If it matches completely, wonderful. If it matches somewhat, but is still distorted, then we are still able to see it as that. But if it distorts, if it gets distorted heavily, then we cannot realize that that is of that same form or the same shape. So to understand it, can somebody read what is there on the screen?
Do you find it simple to read because of the phenomenal power of the human mind? Most people do.
Right. So this is absolutely great. None of except do and to and of and the, all the simpler words or high frequency words, none of the other words actually is there. FNID is a non-word, but we read FNID as if it is FIND, which is a word, and read it as find very fast, very easily. So prototypical theory says that there are distortions, but we are able to handle the errors from the distortions because we have a certain prototype filled into it, which helps us see this as a prototype of the word called find, let's say. It's also the case that our brains are heavily malleable, that we are able to acknowledge and accept these kinds of deviations or errors and still do not have a problem to do it. Right? So I'll stop here. We will start off with trying to explain which of the four theories are the best one to explain what you just saw. You read something which don't exist. And by the way, now we have neural networks which can do it in the computer. Cambridge University has been a world leader in trying to develop neural networks which are able to read text which has a lot of noise in it, which is the case here. So both our minds and also computers now are able to do this. This is amazing. This is a great form, an example of form perception, where you're reading these sentences without these sentences actually being existing in front of you, because they're full of noise and full of errors. But we can do that. Most people can actually, which is part of this writing.
Sir, I think this would be very difficult to explain by Gion theory. How we are able to.
Yes. So we'll start off here. Please think through from your side, just like what we did for the illusory contours. We'll start here. Your job is to pick which of these four theories can explain it, which can't, and then from there we'll also think about the theories a little more before we move on to attention.
Sir, in this case, each word is starting and ending with the correct letter of the actual word, I think. So maybe
there are. I mean, this requires a bit of a discussion. So because of time, and I think I have to stop here. People have to leave, but we'll start off here from the next class on Monday.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.